Just Earth, a short story by Jared I. McGee. He couldn't believe it. Here he was, bleeding out from a piece of rebar through his abdomen on a dirty floor. Him, one of the foremost deep space jumpers, the man who was just short of a god on Mars, dying on this filthy planet, Earth. It had been at least 15 years since he was on the Blue Planet, as it was once called. Of course, a little over a century had passed since Lash, the third planet from the sun, carried that pet name. The human race saw to ruining that by ignoring its cries for the better part of 300 years. Industrial revolution to the Antarctic proxy wars, only 3 centuries of so-called progress wiped out the homeworld. Luckily, a handful of very far-sighted individuals sought to look beyond those darkening skies and heated days off into the distance at Mars. 2070 saw the first humans on the Red Planet. Not 30 years later, mass exodus from Earth would begin. And he was one of those few born on Earth that made his way to be a jumper. 10 years on Earth in the midst of squalor and his family scraping by to keep their air scrubbers running. A scholarship to the Orbital Training School for Gifted Youths, 7 years at OTSGY, 1 transitional training year on the militarized moon base of Akaboas, 3 years on world on Mars. Then he was deified, sent into the farthest reaches of the heavens to seek out even more worlds that could sustain the human race. Mars would get crowded soon enough, and God only knew how quickly they would ruin what terraforming had stuck on the once living, once dead, now living planet. He was the first human to set foot on Titan, dispelling myths and rumors that all the intel on the moon had all been wrong. Humans would soon be watching those famed rings from their front lawns, if you could call those dusty patches of homesteads lawns. He then crossed the celestial Styx in the deepest jump any of his kind had ever made, establishing a self-contained biosphere on the massive mountain on the formidable Charon. Every time the people said it could not be done, he did it. Every time the scientists debated the hows and whys and if we cans, he simply went out and made fantasy reality. Every time the human race thought it had limits, he expanded their vision even farther into the depths of the starlit expanses of the solar system. At 30, he was getting a bit old for the major jumps, but he had been promised this first leap beyond the confines of what is quaintly called the solar system. He would be the first galaxy-class jumper. Well, he and his fairly extensive crew, but he would be the prime. He would call the shots and set his feet down on whichever rock they found that could potentially play host to this invasive species he called his own. All of these accomplishments were rushing back in a torrent that seemed like another lifetime. But he knew that this was just a trick of the dying mind. His eternities of living and reliving his life were seconds of Earth time. He had felt the cold of cryo, but it had nothing on this most biting and bitter of frigidities. And what for? Another drink when he should have told the bartender he was finished for the evening? A smile and a wink and a caress of the shoulder, of the small of the back of a pretty but inevitably backward and antiquated Earth girl. He had not even stayed to fight like a respectable man when her male companion decided he didn't approve of his interactions with her. What was her name? Andromeda? Such a royal name for such a plain place, but then again, everyone on Earth had the names of gods and goddesses and myths and heroes these days. They had to look to the stars and the delusions of old to keep them sane on this bedimmed Tellurian sphere. He wasn't here for any noble purpose. He had simply come back to bask in what he'd escaped. Instead of fighting, he stumbled out of the ramshackle bar, laughing at how ridiculous this palace of anachronisms was. He chortled as he tripped toward the downward slabs of broken stairs. These living fossils, grasping at old faiths, old lives, and the ghosts of what humanity once thought it was, were beyond comedic to him. They were pitiful to the point of hilarity, so he laughed and laughed, right up until he, in this moment of superiority and celebration of his own evolution and godhood, tripped over his feet, sending him sprawling down those dilapidated attempts at stairs and into a salmagundi of loosened masonry from some long-forgotten and long-abandoned construction project. only to land back down and face up on a javelin that had waited for him for 30 years. This modern angel defying God was here dying alone on a fossilized world that didn't even have the good sense to know it was dead yet. Another flash of his jumps. Another. They were comforting to him in this strange, putrid place, there in the dark of an obsolete world. He took solace in knowing that, even in this most ignoble of deaths, he would be remembered a hero. He would be jettisoned into the slowly dying sun, as all jumpers were. And then, as is befitting major heroes of his ilk, his face would go up in everlasting diamond sculpt somewhere, most likely Karen, so he could face outward to those jumps that were meant to be his, but now never could be. He would remain a shining beacon, looking ever forward toward progress and the continuing expansion of the human race and the perpetuation of his life's work. He smiled and let go, warmed by this final thought of his own greatness. Internal Jumper Program Report. System Jumper First Class Ezekiel Phaeton Jatayu was killed on Earth under unknown circumstances. Despite high blood alcohol content in SJFC Jatayu's talk screen, local authorities suspect foul play but currently have no suspects. They are working on collecting additional evidence. SJFC Jatayu has one sister, Phoebe Jatayu, living on-world. Remains have been released to Miss Jatayu, as SJFC Jatayu has no other living relatives. He will not be granted a jumper's release. Miss Jatayu is not comfortable releasing his body for solar cremation, and the High Command has no objections to his burial on Earth. No posthumous honors or distinctions will be granted at this time. The track behind this short story is theme for an unmade space film by Gelsonic and is being used under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. Theme for an unmade space film comes from Gelsonic's album Various Moods. More information on Gelsonic and its founder Jeremy Ray can be found at gelsonic.com/royalty-free. And for loads of great free music, visit the Free Music Archive at freemusicarchive.org. The sound effects in this story are provided by Tristan Lohengrin and Full Boy Media, both accessed through freesound.org. To get in touch with Tristan Lohengrin, go to tristanlohengrin.wix.com/studio. To get in touch with Full Boy Media, go to fullboymedia.co.uk. These sounds are also being used under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike license. As always, thank you for listening to this short story by Jared I. McGee. Please keep your eyes peeled for more short stories to come.